Welcome to the Wandering Road, a place where the unseen moves all around us. The stories you'll hear aren't just whispered legends, they're shadows that cling, footsteps that follow, and whispers that never fade. Every turn pulls you closer to the unknown, and once you've heard what waits here, the night will never feel the same again.
Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of the Wandering Road podcast. I'm your host, Chris, and joining me today is a very special guest. I teased her coming on the show a couple weeks ago, and she is here. Miss Gabrielle Querrard, the host of the Caribbean Mystics podcast. Welcome to the show, Gabrielle.
Thank you so much, Chris. And I want you guys to know that Chris has been on my ass about coming on and following up on emails and all the things. And it's honestly been so helpful in corralling me. And I'm really excited to be here with you guys today. I am a ancestral Virgin Islander. So my family has been in the Virgin Islands for many generations. And then prior to that, I have family that were in St. Bart's and St. Kitts. And so I am a Caribbean baby, true and true. Yeah, I'm super excited to connect with you guys and talk a lot about Caribbean paranormal and Caribbean belief systems.
Yeah, I'm so glad to have you on because I've told my listeners many times I come from that similar background, even though I'm like first generation American. My parents have the Caribbean background. I know they like fit Guyana in there because it's like they're right there, but they're really South American. But if I tell my dad that, he's like, no.
Yeah. No, you know something? I feel like Caribbean people go hard for Guyanese people. Like, you can't tell. I feel like the Belizean people have a hard time being like, I'm Caribbean, but or the Roatan people. But Guyana, I feel like, you know, too, when you listen to the Guyana accent, it actually sounds a lot like our Virgin Islands accent. And so there's a way where it's not hard for Caribbean people when you hear a Guyanese person talk to be like, oh yeah, that's family, in a way where other islands that are not more well known have a harder time, I think, for the recognition.
So I discovered your podcast through Stories with Sapphire, and I was like, I didn't even know there was a Caribbean podcast out there. So I went all the way to episode 1 and just finished everything.
Oh, that's crazy. You've been working hard because we are like, what, 5 seasons in?
Yeah.
That's intense.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
And thank you for listening and for finding the value in it. I feel like the Caribbean and Caribbean storytelling is often shared, especially in the paranormal side.
Agreed.
And so it's nice to be appreciated and enjoyed, I think, and, you know, for the podcast to spread, because that's always been the intention.
I've tried a couple of episodes where I shared some like Caribbean stories, but it's so hard to do, especially if you're just like reading from like someone's personal account or a book or something like that. Like my mom has had, like, grew up in the Dominican Republic. She's had stories and everything, but the problem is they speak Spanish over there. And it's hard, like, even if I had like a following, it would be hard to like bring someone on, interview them in Spanish, and then like translate the whole thing. And it just makes it that much more difficult. But I'm with you that Caribbean stories are often undershared.
Yeah.
Anytime people think of the Caribbean, you think of like the food, baseball, sports, people going to resorts and stuff like that. But you don't think of the paranormal side that everyday people encounter when you're talking about that place. Especially my background being in history, like I wanted to be like a history professor. I pay particular attention to the background of the islands. And when you have the age of exploration where they discovered shit where people were already living, like the stuff that happened to the natives and all the violence and stuff, like in such small areas, that residual energy is just going to linger and give, I don't want to say give power, but I think like help manifest stuff, kind of like tulpas. Because if you have a lot of people in one particular area, for example, I don't think La Llorona is a tulpa, but you hear about it even in the Caribbean throughout Central and South America. So like it gives a lot of credence to that stuff, like with the history and people still believing in stuff. So I think it's really important.
I agree with you. I think, you know, when my friend Paulina came to me, she said that she had this vision of a podcast that detailed true paranormal stories from the Caribbean. And she was really inspired by Spooked. If anyone's ever listened to the Spooked podcast, that's really fantastic. But she was really inspired by the format of Spooked. And as somebody that also loves history, and I make, you know, like historical content on my page about the Caribbean, but more so about the Virgin Islands for my community, I told her that I was super interested in the paranormal and I could not do it in integrity if I didn't draw in the historical component. Because what I see in my community is the rippled effect of colonialism and the indoctrination of puritanical Christianity and the ways in which it has forced people to feel like they have to choose. And so there's a lot of ways in which I think there are a lot of people in the Caribbean that are very gifted spiritually, and they never actually pursue the potential of those gifts out of fear and out of, you know, demonization and all the things. And so it was really important that if we were going to tell these stories, we were going to bring the sacred back into storytelling. Because I really just wanted to uphold the sanctity and to also view these experiences through a compassionate take. You know, like I think when we hear about a haunted house, you know, we oftentimes are just like, oh, an evil entity is, you know, like has taken
Right.
over the house. And it's not too often do we acknowledge that, like, sometimes people aren't ready to die. You know, like sometimes it's hard for spirits who die in really rapid, unexpected ways to truly settle into the fact that, like, they're no longer here. And I think that, you know, when you can view your haunted house through a compassionate lens, it takes away the fear factor and it brings in, I think, a level of understanding and care that is often missing in the storytelling of the paranormal. And then, of course, you are dealing with an evil entity. And at that point, you know, you might need to go and, you know, get your botanicals and get your clearing oils and all the things and really draw in that spiritual cleansing. And I'd like to think that it's most infrequent that it's evil. And oftentimes there's just a really complex story that wants to be told.
That's an interesting take because when I have guests on, it's like rarely do I have stories in which they are of the positive nature.
Mhm.
A lot of it is moved into this house. This thing started throwing stuff at me. I like got scratches on me, had these terrible dreams, sleep paralysis, everything under the sun, you name it, those people have encountered. So I think you give some credence to what if it's just a very confused
Mhm.
entity or spirit that has passed on but doesn't want to go.
Yeah,
That's always within the realm of possibility.
of course. I think that the West has a really big obsession with possession.
Oh, 100%.
And yeah, like we're obsessed with the concept of possession, and not just like demonic possession, but I think possession, like you see a beautiful piece of land and you have to own that, you know, like you see a
Right.
beautiful home and it has to, like, you just need a piece of that pie.
Right.
And I find it to be one of the biggest afflictions that people are carrying in our time and space, because it doesn't, that obsession with possession doesn't always allow for us to view things in a very open-minded way. And so the reason I say that is the very first episode we were able to capture for Caribbean Mystics. It took place in season 1, and I think it was episode 4 or 5. It's called Home Invasion. And it's about a girl named Nicole who is from the Virgin Islands. She goes away to college. She gets a boyfriend. She meets a friend. And when it's time for her to move back home, she invites her boyfriend and her friend to come back home. And they find this beautiful apartment that's honestly underpriced, and it's overlooking the harbor, and they're seeing the sailboats come in every day and all the things. And they happen to have a couple of dogs, and they're really living the island dream, right? While she's in the house, she starts to notice that her mental health starts to decline. There's a downstairs bedroom and then there's an upstairs bedroom. Her and her boyfriend are staying in the upstairs bedroom. There's a beautiful 4-poster bed inside her room, and it's made of mahogany wood, and it's gorgeous, it's ornate. And as time goes on, she starts to struggle mentally, where she's feeling exhausted all the time. And so, as someone who was used to working multiple jobs, she started releasing some of her jobs and getting to a place where she only kept one job so she could just pay her bills. But she was having a really hard time actually leaving the house, as well as her relationship with her boyfriend became strained. Her relationship with her friend became strained, so much so that the friend ended up moving out. As time went on, they started to have electricity issues within the space. Things would turn on even though they weren't plugged into the wall. And she was talking one day with a family friend, and she was telling a family friend about, this experience. And the family friend was like, hey, I know the lady who used to live in that house with her sons, and the lady unfortunately passed away in the house, and she ended up having cancer, and it was a pretty quick battle with cancer before she ended up dying. But I'll come and I'll clear the house with sage, and you should be fine. And so time went on, it didn't happen, it got pushed back over and over. And Nicole's mental health is really like going into the trash. And then she started to notice that she had a dog that stopped coming into her room. And when it would come into the room, it would be agitated. It would be looking up in the corners and growling and barking and all the things. And still, yet again, she's ignoring it. She gets to a place where she no longer wants to leave the house. When she leaves the house, she feels like she's being emotionally and energetically drained. And so she started seeing a psychiatrist. And while she's going through this pursuit of trying to figure out what's wrong with her, she gets a phone call randomly one day, and it is a family friend who lives in New York. And he is just like, hey, Nicole, I'm a psychic. And I know this is a really weird call, but I cannot stop thinking about you. I am having dreams about you, and I need you to know that you're in danger. You are living in a home with a entity that does not want you there. You moved into her home and you repainted her walls and you destroyed her, polka dotted cabinetry that she had painted with her sons. And there were all of these things that they had done together, and you came and you dismantled this thing that she had put together, that she had prided herself on, and she wants you out of her house. She ended up getting a thing of white roses and she left it in the bedroom, moved out of the bedroom, and then eventually she was able to leave the house. And in the back end, one of the things that Paulina and I really carved into with that story, and if anybody has a chance, I would suggest you listen to it because Nicole was a really good storyteller. But one of the things that Paulina and I got into when we did our discussion side of the episode was, imagine that you have your family and you love your family and you have all of these memories with your family. And then one day you get ill and you die shortly thereafter, and you don't really have the time to really acknowledge that you're transitioning or to make peace with it, or, like, there are all of these ways and regretful, and you wish that you had had more time to see your kids grow up and to see who they become and all the things. And there's a pull of humanness that I felt when I heard that story, and I felt it in my heart space because I know the house. I pass the house when I drive from place to place. I know the family, right, who owns the house. And it's really hard to hear stories like that and to not be compassionate to the spirit, like, that poured into that space and loved that space and was connected to that space. And in a way, Nicole moved into that lady house, like Nicole came out of nowhere and started changing up that lady stuff. Now, it's not Nicole's fault. She didn't know. But I just think that there's a way where if we start to view these stories from a perspective of like humanity, I feel like a lot of the ways in which the stories are told would change.
I agree with. I'm glad you shared that example of one of those stories because it really enforces the notion that it's not just evil. There's a lot of gray area
Yeah.
that we need to consider when we talk about the paranormal. Like for me, I grew up in a haunted house. We didn't know it was haunted until like we moved in.
Yeah.
And that in particular, that thing was, I've told this story. I have some Caribbean stories from when I went to the Dominican Republic that I'd be more than happy to share on your show. But
Yeah.
if you're interested in listening to like the entire thing, I'd be happy to share that as well. Because
Yeah.
this took place in New York. And basically, when we moved into that house, it's like it was one of those things where I shared that story multiple times. And every single time I begged people, like, please tell me there was some sort of explanation for this. And they're like, nah, dude, that sounds like something evil or
And just
so.
for the record, I absolutely believe that evil in fact exists. And I do believe that there are instances where it is in fact something that is malevolent and malicious. And so I just also I guess my messaging is that the duality, right, is so important. And the storytelling and you know, one of the complexer parts of running a Caribbean podcast is that so many of our stories come from the Virgin Islands because that's where I'm physically located. And so when people are sharing their stories, they're not talking about, you know, like their grandmother in Ireland. They're talking about their grandmother whose house I pass, whose family I know. Like there's such a responsibility I feel in taking the stories and making sure that the family is protected and held,
Right.
you know, to the highest standard and sharing these stories because for a lot of people, and I'm sure you've experienced it as someone that's also a digitizer of the paranormal, a lot of these stories are so profound for people that it changes the trajectory of their lives. You know, like I just always want to hold up the duality of like, hey, like maybe your grandmother wasn't evil, you know, like
You're
maybe
right.
you know, because it gets complicated really quick and you know, and it is human to be both the blade and the handle, right?
Yeah.
In one moment where you're the villain and in one moment we're the victim. And it's the ebb and flow that it's humans we will participate in for the entirety of our lifetime. I think with the paranormal storytelling, you hear so much of the evil and the demonic and the this, that, and the other, that I think that to draw in the full picture of the paranormal and its limitless bounds, I feel like you gotta pull it back more and engage with the happy and the positive and the sad and the grief and the compassion.
Right. I agree. But I will say one thing. It's more fun to talk about the evil stuff
It
than it
is.
is.
It is.
It
I'm
really
a
is.
you know, it's funny you'd say that because I'm always such a like I hear about a haunted house and I'm like, "Oh yeah, I'm ready to hear that." And then someone comes and they're like, "I have a story about an angel." And I'm like, "Okay, well,
Okay,
let's
let's do that.
capture it." And funny enough, I find that my audience always prefer the the lighter stories, which is
Really?
so
Okay.
fascinating because I just for me, I hear a story and I'm like, "Oh my gosh, that is crazy." And I'll put it out there and people will be like, "Yeah, it was good." But then I put in something frilly and magical and whimsical, and people are like, "Oh my god, I related so much." I'll start getting all the emails, and it's all very special. And I've come to realize that, like, I think people actually crave miracles, and I
Yeah.
think that there's something about hearing about miracles and miraculous events that actually light people up so much.
I think it definitely might be a cultural thing because
Yeah,
it's the evil stuff and whatnot really catches people in here
yeah.
well, you guys are
You're
technically
like
a
the
part
more
of the
evil, the
US.
better.
Right, yeah. Yeah. Especially you brought up like the puritanical view.
Yeah.
And believe it or not, to some people, what we do is taboo. Like you're
Mhm.
not supposed to talk about this stuff. Like
Yeah.
you don't acknowledge it because you're calling it in. And one thing
Mhm.
I will say, that whole concept of, you draw this stuff in when you talk about it, that is absolutely true. In my family, like my mom has 9 other sisters, like her eldest sister passed away. They see things, they feel
Mhm.
things, and it's stuff they
Yeah.
don't really talk about because they're like all diehard Catholic because you have this conflicting view of like, shit, I can see dead people, I can feel where they're around me, but
Mhm.
by my religious beliefs, technically I'm not supposed to do that.
Yeah.
So you have that clash. But what I found in certain places in the Caribbean, they do well to mix that together.
Mhm.
But what I was initially trying to get at is like over here, like at least where I'm located in the US and where I grew up, a lot of people love those evil things because they're busy going to church, talking about angels, everything. You don't
Mhm.
really go into that dark side unless you watch a horror movie like The Exorcist or the Conjuring
Mhm.
series or something like that. I think it depends where your listening base is from. You'll
Yeah.
probably gain more traction based off of that. But one thing that I wanted to get to was some of your stories that you have personally. Like you growing up in the Virgin Islands, I know this word is used all over the Caribbean. They're like, you better go to sleep or the jumbies are gonna come get you.
Mhm.
Like
Mhm.
all that stuff. So what was it like for you growing up on the Virgin Islands? Did your parents or grandparents share these stories with you? Did
Mhm.
you have any experiences yourself on the island?
Yeah. Growing up in the Virgin Islands, there's always a lot of storytelling, whether it's paranormal or otherwise. And I particularly am partial to the paranormal storytelling because I like a good little, like unexplainable phenomena. And I would say that because you're in a place where it's surrounded by nature and water and there's plants all around and you could hear the crickets in the background and all the things. It's just I think that it immerses people in a way where it's more easier for them to enter a unconscious state or to connect with like their third eye and their root chakra. And so I think that there's a way where environmentally there is a nudge toward having paranormal experiences. And something else a lot of people don't know is that, like, in the Virgin Islands, British Virgin Islands, United States Virgin Islands, and Puerto Rico, there's a hotspot of UFO activity that happens here as well. So it's not simply like, you hear stories of like the ghosts or the ghouls and goblins and Jubiram, but like you're also hearing people be like, I see things up in the sky all the time, like, or I have had these very unexplainable experiences. I've been trying to get this girl on a podcast for the longest time who has an experience with a alien actually doing surgery on her one
Wow.
day in the VI. Yeah, like, and so you grow up hearing these stories and it's so far reaching and wide, the paranormal experiences, that you just kind of come to acknowledge that it's real, right? And anybody who is just like, oh, the paranormal isn't real, I kind of side eye because I'm just like, I feel like everything that's happening right now, especially with the disclosure taking place, and
Yeah.
I just feel like at this point you're being purposefully obtuse because I think that there is enough evidence to suggest that all this time we've had it wrong, or
Right.
we've been purposefully misled. If you wanted to go
Right.
down the conspiracy theory rabbit hole,
People that say, I don't believe in the paranormal, those same people will say, I don't believe in the paranormal, but there was this one time X, Y, and Z. I saw this
yeah,
floating woman coming towards me while I was staying over at my grandmother's place. But yeah, I
yeah.
don't believe in the paranormal.
Exactly. It's really fascinating, and I also think that people kind of do it to protect themselves, like mentally. Like, what would it mean? How would it unravel a person's sense of identity if they really had to entertain that, like, they're interdimensional beings, Like, for some people that's just too hard. But growing up in the Caribbean, because there's so much storytelling around the paranormal, there is a way where it becomes like commonplace. And when you have these paranormal experiences, you feel like, me personally, I've just felt like, oh, like this is like a fact of life. And so, like, one of the stories I would grow up hearing about was the Sukunya, which is an entity that exists and is acknowledged mostly in the French Caribbean. But because there has been such a movement of people from island to island, the story came to the Virgin Islands and existed among the Frenchy population. So I would be considered Frenchy.
What does
Um,
that mean? Like, if you consider yourself a Frenchie?
to make it easier for people in the States, it's similar to like the Creole people in Louisiana.
Okay,
Um,
gotcha.
yeah, and so it's like lighter hued people who at this point in time have mixed but there's a mixture of like European descent, African descent, and in some families like indigenous descent. But they're largely people that have been in the Caribbean for hundreds of years, right?
Gotcha.
And over time, there's been like a cultural mixing and et cetera, et cetera. So I'd be considered a Frenchie, and obviously I am of French descent, Frenchie. And so this story traveled up through the French Caribbean and then came to the Virgin Islands. And so it was about this entity that could be hosted by a human body. And it is almost like the vampire of the Caribbean. So it has this succubus energy to it. And so they said that it was this little old lady that lived in a place which is a small neighborhood called Frenchtown. And in Frenchtown, there are these little, actually very Caribbean looking homes. It's like wooden homes with the gingerbread trims and a little out porch, but they're small homes. They're made of wood. And so she used to live in this little wooden house. And strangely enough, speaking of the duality, she was really nice to the kids. So she always had candy by her house, and the little French children would go and get a candy. But in the nighttime, it was said that she would peel off her human skin and hang it up on a coat rack. And she would turn into a ball of fire. And she would, because she's not in a physical form, she could go under the door frame and she could go in the cracks between the window and the wall. And she was able to go into people's rooms at night and suck their blood. And then right before morning came, she would go back to her house and put back on her human skin and zip it up. And so as time went on, the story, started to grow. And children would say that when they would go to her and she didn't have candy that night, they would see a ball of fire flash across the sky of Frenchtown. And then by the next day, she mysteriously had candy again. And so that was one of the reasons why they were always like, "Are you a sukunya?" And then there were other things, I suspect. But one of the reasons why they know that something was up with this lady is because she claimed to have a jumbi in a glass jar. For people who don't know what a jumbi is any type of entity. So a good entity, a bad entity, a ghost, a goblin, or whatever is considered a jumbi. It's like a pantheon of spirits.
Right.
So it's said that she used to keep a jumbi in a glass jar, and she would let the children in the neighborhood feed the jumbi. And they had to feed the jumbi an even number of grains of rice, because if they fed the jumbi an odd number of grains of rice, the jumbi would break out of the jar and could wreak havoc on the neighborhood. So obviously the kids decided that they were gonna follow suit. When people would wake up in the morning and they had bruises and bite marks on their skin, people obviously became very nerve-wracked by the fact that they have this thing living in the community. And so word started to spread and more people started to come forward and say that they too had that experience. And so a group of men in the French community decided that they were going to get together and get rid of the sukunya. And so one evening they were hiding behind the bush by her home, and they watched her peel off her human skin and go into her ball of fire form. And after she left the house that night, they snuck into the house and they sprinkled salt on her skin, which destroyed the skin. And by the time she came back in the morning time, she had to get into the skin before the sun rose, or else she would be destroyed. And naturally, she couldn't get into the skin because it had withered away from the salt. And so you'll find in a lot of Caribbean storytelling that rice and salt continue to come up over and over again for their cleansing properties, or there's always just some sort of lore attached to these two items for sure. Probably because they're very accessible in the region. But like that was one of the stories that, and it wasn't just the sukunya, it was a sukunya. So there could be multiple sukunyas living around you. Exactly.
Yep. Which is funny enough because like my grandmother, when she was alive, she would tell us stories about in Guyana of what she would see at night. If you think about like 1960s and 50s Guyana, like even into the 70s, very rural. People go to work in plantations to cut cane and all this other stuff, like shit you thought would only happen in like the 1700s. Like they were doing that like in the 1950s and 60s. But it sounds similar to The creature I heard about is called a fire ras.
Mm.
It would come at night and it would suck your blood. It would take a ball form and it would do the same exact thing that you said. And then during the day, it would have to go away because it'll get killed by the sun.
Yeah. I have no doubts that like with Guyana's proximity to Trinidad, it's just like it makes sense why there would be these overlapping themes. And one of the things that I think that Sapphire brought up that I thought was really poignant is she was talking about how when she hears Caribbean folklore, it often reminds her of Filipino lore.
Right.
And actually think that when I hear about these similarities, it really, for me, focalizes the truth of it all. Because what are the chances of a practice or a belief or an entity, existing all around the world by cultures that would not normally have. I mean, we have Filipino people in the Virgin Islands, but that's recent, right? And we're talking about very old stories. And I just have to believe that there's a validation. A lot of these practices and belief systems, even when you look at a salt, right? Salt is just such a fundamental ritual tool. Yeah. So just to conclude, I just find it to be really interesting and very validating, I think, for people when you hear of these overlapping themes and stories from like all across the world. And it also speaks about a power of like human consciousness because it's just even when you look at like something like fire, right? Fire
Right.
came into existence at a particular time for a particular facet of civilization, and the knowledge of it spread. And there is a very popular like hypnotherapist, and among other things, like occultist. Her name is Dolores Cannon. And she has this really interesting concept where she talks about how she feels like extraterrestrials seeded human consciousness with specific facets of information with the intention of moving
Sure.
humanity forward. And she uses the concept of fire and the discovery of fire as an example of this. And she talks about it with nuclear energy. And at the end of the day, it's up to humans to decide how they're going to wield this new power, whether it's going to be regressive for humanity or it's going to carry humanity forward.
Sure. That's an interesting concept. I never really thought about fire or the discovery of fire by humanity. Because
Yeah,
like how would it spread across multiple
exactly.
continents?
And historically, it popped up in different places, actually relatively close to each other.
Right.
And so there's a way where you sit down and you think about that, or even our latest conundrum with all of this like nuclear weapon talk that we've been having for like 100 years now. It's just like the knowledge of how to create nuclear energy was, according to canon, was seeded into human consciousness. And the concept of like nuclear energy could be used to like progress humanity, and not, we don't have to pay such high power bills, or energy could be free, or all the things. And because humanity often moves in shadow, we created weapons, lol. And
Yeah.
so
That's
now,
that's what we do,
yeah.
unfortunately.
And so here we are.
Yeah.
But yeah, Caribbean lore I find to be very intuitive, and there's so much wisdom behind it. A lot of the energetic practices feels, like when we talk about salt and using salt as a cleansing mechanism, there is no more powerful cleanser than the ocean, right? And so there's a way where like our elders will be down by the shoreline and they'll go early in the morning, and that's when the iodine content in the water is highest. And it's just super healing. And so when you look at the science and when you hold it up against the spirituality, it all makes sense. But for so long, we've divorced them from each other because it was so taboo to even consider spirituality a thing, right?
Of course.
Um,
Yeah.
and so, yeah, and so when you look at the belief systems and the storytelling, there's a particular wisdom and ancestral knowing that I find to be particularly captivating.
It's one of those things that should be definitely explored more. There's a reason why our elders did certain things in particular ways.
Mhm.
My grandmother always had this saying. She would always like when I was a teenager, she was still around. She's like, "Don't let the sun catch you in your bed." I'm like, Like, why? I'm not gonna wake up at 4:30 with you. Like,
That's so funny. My father would say the same thing, but he'd always be like, "You're bringing laziness to the house if
yeah,
you stay in bed long." And it's just like, "What do you mean?" And he's like, "The energy of laziness. Like, if you in bed longer than 7 a.m., then you've invited the energy of laziness." And you were talking earlier about the Catholics, and I'm always just really intrigued by them because as
uh-huh.
somebody who grew up in a Catholic family, I find their inability, like their inflexibility to be chosen. Because what do you mean you're out here drinking the body and blood of Jesus and then you can't acknowledge the like existence of ghosts, you know? Like
Right.
what do you that's like blood magic. Like what do you mean God came and gave a prophecy multiple times to multiple people, with angel Gabriel coming to Mary and like, hey,
Yeah.
I'm gonna, like they're it's interesting to me that their belief in the miraculous and in the unexplained starts and stops at the Bible.
Maybe it's just because of like my background with my mom, because I call her super Catholic. You walk into our house, well, her house, she has like fucking picture of like Pope John Paul II, like
Mhm,
on the wall.
mhm,
There's
mhm,
the Virgin Mary everywhere, baby Jesus everywhere. What's interesting with my exposure to it and being around people that are not necessarily Catholic, they're more like Protestant. I noticed that those are the folks, like the more evangelical and the like Protestants and stuff over here at least, are the ones that are least willing to engage with the concept of the paranormal. Within I can only speak for my family. So like with my mom and stuff, like she wouldn't want us to talk about it as like when we were younger, but
mhm.
now they're more open about it. And it's one of those things where it's like we acknowledge the existence of it because the counterbalance is there as well.
Mhm,
So like you can't just have all good and everything without the counterbalance to it. So it's like yin and yang.
mhm.
And that's how like we always viewed it. But there's always one thing, like we alluded to this earlier, it's the concept of talking about it, because us doing this show right now, we're spending our energy and
Mhm.
it's calling that. We're giving our energy. From my perspective, that's why some people are more hesitant to like it starts and stops at the Bible, because we don't want to give our energy to it. We don't want to manifest it. We don't want to bring it to us. But
Yeah.
I think it's one of those things where you don't control when that comes to you.
I was just coming to say, I think at least once in your life, whether you know it or not, whether you subconsciously or you don't, I think at least at one moment in everyone's life, the paranormal comes to find you. Like we like to be like, oh, the veil is thin. There is no veil. We are living among these energies and these spirits, and our own consciousness may shield us from being able to see or to hear or to smell. And I think the day comes for everyone that something unexplainable happens.
Yeah.
I like to tell this story, and you may have heard it on Stories with Sapphire, but it just talks about the miraculous way in which the paranormal happens. And it was that I used to manage a metaphysical shop, and I used to have people come in all the time, and they would have problems or they would be exploring or whatever. And so it was really customary
Was it
to
like a botanica? We call it that. Like a
kind of, yeah,
yeah.
yes. So
Okay.
it was actually the same thing. And people
Okay.
could get readings upstairs and it was like a
Yeah,
whole
yeah.
vibe. And so anyway, so because people were naturally coming in and wanting help or assistance or information or whatever, it was a customary thing to greet people as they walked in. And one day I was moving around displays or something in the store, and a lady walks in, and I have my back turned to her because I'm working on a display, but I say, "Hi, good day, welcome to Sage. Thank you for coming in. Let me know if you need any help." And she never responded to me, which I was like, "Oh, that's weird," because again, in the Caribbean, it's very cultural that you say good morning, good afternoon, good evening. And so that immediately tipped me off, and I was like, "Oh, something's wrong with her." And so after a couple of minutes of her walking around the store and me kind of feeling into her energy, I turned to her and I was like, "Hey, just let me know if you need any help or anything. I'd love to support you." And she turned back to me and really cynically said, um, "Unless you have something for fertility, there is or she says something along the lines of, unless you have something to make my last embryo stick for my last IVF treatment, there's, I guess, nothing that you can really do for me. And so I, turned around and I asked her, what the situation was. And she said that she was 50 years old and she was using her very last IVF embryo after multiple failed attempts and dealing with years of infertility that's been unexplained. And so this was her last shot to be a mom, and it was all she wanted. I felt really bad for her, and I felt honestly like I didn't have the tools to help her. And so I did the only thing that I felt like I could within my frame of understanding and ability, and that was to light an intention candle for her. And so we had a little apothecary in the corner, and I asked her first and foremost if I could light an intention candle for her embryo transfer, and she very reluctantly said yes, because I think in her mind she was like, I
Like, the
mean,
fuck is this shit gonna
yeah,
do?
who does woman think she is with all of this woo fuck? And so I took her to the apothecary, and I was like, I pulled out herbs that I kind of intuitively picked, and I just explained to her what each herb does, and I sprinkled some on top of the candle to dress it. And then I gave her a pen and paper, and I asked her to write a intention down on the paper for her conception. And she said that she didn't really have it in her to do it. And she, you could tell she just felt defeated. And so I said, okay, I'll write it for you then. And I wrote something along the lines of, calling in a healthy and happy baby, and that this lady has a healthy and happy pregnancy and a healthy and happy delivery. We held a lighter and we lit the candle together, and I told her that I would actually hold on to the candle because I didn't trust her to go home and keep lighting the candle. So I was like, I'll hold on to the candle. Every day that I come to work, I will light the candle, and when I leave in the afternoon, I will extinguish the candle, but I will do it every single day until the candle's completely out. And she said, okay. And she left. And I forgot all about her. But I did light the candle over and over again until it finished, because that felt important to me, because I had promised it to her. And so about a year later, I am in the store talking to one of my friends. I'm in the corner, passing the time. And I had two ladies walk in to the store. And I greeted them, hi, good day, welcome to Sage. And they greeted me, and I continued talking. And a lady comes and she walks straight up to me, and she's just like, do you remember me? And I looked at her and I was like, you look familiar, but I'm not too sure. And she was like, I'm the lady that came in here a year ago. I was 49 making 50, and I was about to do my last embryo transfer. And you lit a candle with me. And I said, oh my gosh, hello, I remember you now. And she said, can I speak to you outside? And so I said, yeah, of course. I wanted to give her spaciousness. And I go outside, and there are two baby strollers with twin newborns in front of me. And I was just like so blown away by it. And I was like, oh my God. And she was like, after you lit that candle for me, I went on to do my embryo transfer, and my embryo split in two. And I ended up with twins. And she's like, I just wanted you to meet them because you're the reason they're here. And I didn't really believe that it was me, to be honest. Like, I think that destiny, laid a perfect sequence of events. And at that point in time, I was just like, oh, that's a really crazy thing, right? And I kept on moving. Anyway, so the following year, it's my 30th birthday, and I'm laying in bed. I'm sick with the flu, so I can't go anywhere. Power is out and had been out all day. So it was such a shitty 30th birthday. And so I go on Facebook, and naturally I have all of these like inboxes and messages saying happy birthday. And I opened this message from this lady, and she reintroduced herself, and she's like, I don't know if you remember me, but I'm the lady with the twin boys who you helped to get pregnant. And I just want you to know that I discovered the most miraculous thing. I saw that it's your birthday today, and it is also the birthday of my twins.
No
And
way.
I was just like, I felt like God and spirits and everything was trying to be like, girl, like put some respect on that name for supporting this lady with her fertility journey. And like they gave such irrefutable evidence that I wouldn't say I got her pregnant. And I by no means think that I'm any type of fertility genie, believe you me. But I also think that there is a way where sometimes we have the capacity to be the curator of miracles. And I love that Marianne Williamson, who wrote the book A Course in Miracles, talks about that it is our innate birthright to be givers and receivers of miracles. And, like I received that. It felt like a gift that day that I had been given as well, to just remember my own divinity and my own power and the power that I have to shape the world around me and to be a positive fixture in somebody's life.
Yeah, that's a fascinating story. And I remember as you were sharing it, I was like, this sounds familiar. And it did come back to me from one of your episodes. But at first I was skeptical, but then I started believing in the concept of manifestation, that your mindset will truly help shape your path.
Yeah.
Because if you truly think, for example, if you truly thought that, I'll do Caribbean mystics, but I don't know, it'll probably fail.
Mm-hmm.
That would affect how you went into the podcast.
Yeah.
So, like my friend and I, like my co-host and I, he lives in Hawaii, by the way. So that's why he's not here. Because
I love it. I'm sure his Hawaiian lore is just so fascinating. They have such rich lore over there.
He's from Pennsylvania, so he like moved to Hawaii, but even moving there, like he noticed a couple things like, oh, this is a little strange. But him and I, like, we used to joke early on in the podcast, like, oh, we're not, this is whatever, this is to shoot the shit, we're not going to gain a following. But as soon as we shifted our mindset, like, okay, we based here, now we could baseline here and do this and take it more seriously. We had more people more responsive to us, and we're able to grow and have brilliant guests such as yourself coming on the show and having these like awesome conversations. So I really think that you said you lit the intention candle. It's just the personification of it.
Yeah.
It's not going to make the difference. But if you pick something to like put all your energy in, that's why they say like it's a vessel. You write out your goals. You say these affirmations daily because you're convincing your subconscious that you are capable of gaining what you actually want. And that kind of happened with me and my wife when we like got this house. It's like, oh, there's no way we could move out there, yada yada, even though it's great, whatever. And then like I was like, you know what? We went through some hardships just because that's just the nature of getting a house. And then we ended up getting it. So just kind of applying that, I completely agree. There's something to it. I wouldn't want to say that it's as simplistic as lighting a candle or just writing it down. I think there's more to it when it comes to the spiritual aspect of it.
I think it's a grand orchestration of the universe.
There's so much going on with spirit, God, or however you view it, that we don't understand, that I don't think we'll ever understand. I have this theory that when people pass away, our minds, our consciousness, our souls connect back to this like one giant consciousness, and then we learn all the secrets of the universe. Like when you're born, you lose all of that, but when you pass away, it's like you take your experiences and then you kind of plug that back in.
Yeah.
Had so many drunken conversations about that with my friends as well.
I mean, it's literally the conversation. It's like, what happens after death? What do we do with the grand sum of experiences and growth and learning that happens here? And it's I think the most important question of our lifetimes, right? Is what happens after this, and how is what we're experiencing now and doing now and being now preparing us for what's coming after?
Right.
And I think that, one of the parts of this human existence, and one of the reasons why I'm a big refuter of the concept of heaven and hell, is because I think that there's no real accountability, in it. There's no growth. If this is all I have, this is that one chance that I get. It's just like, it just feels so counterintuitive to everything that I know about God and the existence of the divine. because the divine is limitless and it's potential, like unexplored potential. And to have something so finite and so punitive, like it does not feel like it's in alignment. But I understand why for so long humanity has held on to this very finite concept, because again, if imagination that has been stretched cannot go back to its original form. And I feel like there's a way where for a lot of people the stretching process is really uncomfortable to perceive. You know, when I started managing a metaphysical store, I was coming from a much more Christian perspective. And so it took me a long time to like want to delve into the cards, you know, like the tarot cards and oracle cards. And it was something that I had to stretch my imagination to. And it's something that I'm grateful that I've stretched my imagination to, because I've since stretched past it. And I think that this is what this lifetime thing is about, is stretching your imagination so it cannot go back to its original form.
See, I'm a little iffy with the cards. If you know what you're doing, perfect.
Some people unlock portals and all kind of stuff. I'm just like, you got to be so responsible. Like, it's in the same way how you feel about the cards, how I feel about Ouija boards. I'm just
Me
like,
too.
No,
I fucking hate them.
Yeah, I'm just like, from time somebody say they pop open at you a Ouija board, I'm like, oh, good luck. Whereas the cards, I feel like there's a little bit more control, because the messaging is from the message of a Ouija board. If the Ouija board says, I'm going to kill you, there's no other, I don't know how to like, you know, work my brain around that message. But when you pull the tarot cards and you see like the death card come up, you know, there's so much interpretations to death and transformation and resurrection and, you know, reinvention, that it's just like, you don't have to go there. With the Ouija board, there is no twist in the truth or you know, tilt in your head and squint in your eye. And no, it is what it is.
See, I'm glad you take that perspective too. Like, we're on the same wavelength. I don't touch Ouija boards. I'm not with it. I know there's some people that just view it as a game, and I'm like,
I don't
really?
know.
Again, intention. You use a Ouija board, you set the intention of opening a portal that most people get scared and don't know how to close.
Yeah.
So it's one of those things. It's like,
it definitely shouldn't be in like the children's aisle of the grocery store. I won't lie to you though. A selfish part of me, Chris, is like, anytime someone comes to me and they're like, I have a Ouija board story, I'm like, good. I'm so happy you have this story, because I just know it's going to be filled with mess. And that's the kind of stories I like.
My cousin, he went to Canada. He has a cousin in Canada. They messed with a Ouija board. A whole bunch of shit started going crazy. I've been trying to get you on the pod, Sean, for like 2 years now. Come on. I know you got kids. They're getting older.
You can make it.
And they like had to burn the Ouija board. A whole bunch of shit. He's like my cousin on my dad's side. So he has all the Jumbie stories and stuff. Funny enough about that, when like my sister and my mom come to visit, and like my mom can see and feel things, like I've alluded to, and she like came in here and she like absolutely loves this house. She's like, there's nothing here. But if like we would hear like a bang or a noise from the outside, I'd just be a smart ass, and it's like, especially if it's nighttime, be like, it's a Jumbie. Like,
I mean, and you see it, you're here manifesting it. I believe it sounds like to me, Chris, that you were secretly hoping that your house was haunted, and that there would be some kind of like energetic resonance there that you could explore more deeply. And sometimes that's okay. Like maybe that's, you know, something that you're calling in this lifetime.
Yeah, I'll tell you what, living in a Jumbie house, I don't ever want to do that again.
I believe you.
It's one of those things where when I was younger at the time, nobody wants to talk about it. But now that we're all older, everybody laughs about it. It's like, oh yeah, I remember that. Like, I brought this story up to my aunt. You remember when like the Jumbie pushed you into the closet? She's like, oh yeah, she busted out laughing. Like, how you remember that? I was like, because I saw you. Because I saw it happen, type of thing. And it's just, it's funny how
humor is such a way that Caribbean people is like get over their fear and stuff. Like, it's literally the mask for fear and anxiety, is that good old humor. And I feel like you see that across the board, even with like mental health struggles. It's just like, turn it into a joke so that way we can cope. It's such a good coping mechanism, but it's also so toxic.
Oh yeah, I love those memes on Instagram that says when I'm depressed, but I remember I'm Dominican.
Yeah.
That's
Yes,
me.
exactly that. Chris, I am really grateful that you brought me on to
Definitely.
talk about all the things. I feel like we explored everything about the creation of fire to Caribbean lore and legend to what happens in the afterlife. But I would love to come on again. I like the free flowing conversation because it just
Yeah.
feels like we could get into so much.
That's what I love about it. It's just free flowing. Like we
Yeah.
always have this type of policy when we run this show. Like anybody is welcome to come on. You could share your perspective. We're not going to judge you. We're not going to call anybody crazy. Because, there's like some podcasts and stuff like paranormal, like people share stories and they like rip on them and like, oh, you didn't see that or shit like that. I'm like, no, everybody has an experience. I can't say anything about your experience because I wasn't there. I had my own. And I'd like for people to afford the same grace to me
Of course.
that I afford to them. But Gabrielle, thank you so much for agreeing to come on the show today. I would definitely love to have you back on for a follow-up episode.
Yeah. I would love to. I had so much fun, and I'm so happy that everything aligned and everything that I could join in because sometimes it's nice to not have the like structured, like discussion. Sometimes it's nice to just be out here, chopping it up. And so I'm really grateful. And I just want to tell your audience how grateful I am to be able to have shared in this experience with them and to keep on asking questions and inquiring and stretching that imagination.
Absolutely. I know there's a couple things I wanted to get to that we didn't get to, and I would, like I said, that would be for a part 2 because I know you have some of your own paranormal experiences
Yeah.
we could talk about, and a couple of superstitions, Caribbean superstitions we could get into. One thing I want to ask you
Yeah.
before you go and we
Okay.
plug your podcast. The one superstition, walking backward into your house after a funeral. Do y'all do that too?
We don't do it after a funeral. We actually do it if you're coming in the house anytime after 12 a.m., you walk in
Oh,
backwards.
okay.
But there are other like funeral superstitions. So you're supposed to obviously wear black, but like if it's close family, you're expected to wear black for like 3 to 6 months. Some
Oh, wow.
widows will like be wearing black for a year. You're also supposed to move around the furniture of the deceased because you want to confuse the spirit so they don't come back and set up shop back in their home. You want them to, go on into the light. And pregnant women aren't supposed to go into the cemetery
Right.
because it's believed that you are carrying a empty vessel of sorts, or the energy that's within your womb is a new energy, and so they're not anchored to their body, and so it's very possible for a stronger spirit to kick your child's spirit out their body and then set up shop.
So it's similar.
Yep,
I'm glad I
yep.
got to ask that. I'm glad I got to ask that. But,
Of course. And
yeah.
maybe if your audience has any questions for me or if they wanted me to elaborate on something further, maybe we could include that in part 2. I would love to be able to engage with them and stuff.
Oh yeah, absolutely. So open forum, y'all. If you have any questions for
Yeah.
Gabrielle, shoot them over. We'd love to bring that up for discussion. And for the next discussion that we have, Gabrielle, I would love to have my co-host on for
That
that
sounds
as well, because he's had UFO experiences. The Caribbean in your area seems like a hot hub for that. So I think we could
Yep.
dedicate a good episode for that. But before we let you go, Gabrielle, why don't you tell the listeners where they could find you on social
Sure.
media and where can they find the Caribbean Mystics podcast?
So at Caribbean Mystics podcast on every platform, including TikTok. And if you want to listen to Caribbean Mystics, you can find us on all podcast streaming platforms, including Apple, Spotify, and YouTube. Just to be super clear, Caribbean Mystics podcast is a true paranormal podcast that details stories from the Caribbean region. And so all of these stories are told from first person perspective. So you are hearing it from the horse's mouth it's themselves. And the benefit of this type of storytelling is you can hear the emotion of the storyteller in them reliving in some ways some of these very traumatic experiences, and in other ways these very life altering miraculous experiences.
You heard her, folks. Go give it a listen. I will say my favorite episode is the Obia episode. The entire, like, your catalog of episodes are brilliant, but if I had to pick one to listen to again, folks, go listen to that episode. Go follow her show. Get a hold of her. If you have Caribbean descent and you have stories from the island, get a
Oh,
hold of her.
please send them in.
And
We're planning
them in.
season 6, and it's supposed to launch at the end of summer. And I'm out here trying to corral stories. Obia Bloodlines is the name of the episode that Chris is talking about, and you can find it on season 3. And it's the last episode of season 3. I don't remember what episode number, but it's called Obia Bloodlines, and it's pretty weird. So there's a little bit of animal cruelty in that one. But it was for spell work, so if that's a no-go for you, then don't bother.
Or give it a chance.
Or give it a chance. Yeah. But go with a open-minded spirit, because this is a belief system that so many people in the Caribbean still practice.
Agreed. But Gabrielle, thank you once again. And folks, we hope you enjoyed today's episode, and we are looking forward to a part 2 with Gabrielle.
Thank you. What do you call your podcast people? Wanderers?
I don't call them anything, to be honest with you.
Oh,
I should probably do that.
Yeah, because I call my people Misties. I'll be like,
Misties.
Bye, Wanderers. Until next time, stay spooky.
You've reached the end of tonight's journey on the Wandering Road. The show is written and produced by me, Chris, and my co-host, Dean. If you've got a scary story of your own, or if you'd like to join us as a guest, send your tale to twroadpodcast@gmail.com. We'd love to hear from you. Don't forget to follow us on social media for more haunted fun. And if you enjoyed tonight's episode, please rate, review, and share the show. It helps keep the lantern burning for fellow travelers. Until next time, keep your eyes on the road and your mind in the shadows, because the wandering never ends.